So just a couple quick things before we get started, right? So for next time, you're going to be reading in the section on the Atlantic slave trade, Thomas Clarkson and Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Against the Slave Trade, and William Cobbett's arguments in favor of it, right? So this is what we're going to be looking at next time. We'll give you guide questions at the end of class. I do want to say, one, that I appreciate that everybody actually took the vocabulary quiz. Sometimes when I post online quizzes, people get forgetful and things just don't happen. But yeah, so just remember that you're always going to have this due Sunday midnight, right? One quick thing about scoring these as well, because a couple of you forgot a component or two. So remember that what I want is the name of the author of a relevant text, the name of the relevant text, and then also a brief but substantial definition, right? So here's how the breakdown works for this, right? So each is worth 1 point total. And the way we break this down, you get half a point for the definition. You get a quarter point for the name of the text, and a quarter point for the name of the author. So if you got the definition correct, or the definition substantially right, but you were missing, but you didn't get full points for the answer, it's probably because you were missing one of these two other elements, right? Now the reason I want you doing this, the reason I want you paying attention to this, right, is that because essentially what you're doing with these vocabulary quizzes is building a study guide for the exam. Right? The exam IDs are going to be taken from your answers on these vocabulary quizzes. So the better you can kind of reinforce these things in your memory, the better you will do on the exam, right? Plus, this will also give you a set kind of script to study from, right? So does anybody have any questions about anything before we get started? About homework, about readings, about anything else? Yeah, Danielle.
An example from the quiz where it said Marie Antoinette.
Uh-huh.
How would you put that in for definition? This is so and so, yada yada, and then put the particular text. And the author, how would you?
Yeah. So you would tell me who Marie Antoinette is, right? And also why she matters in the text that she is mentioned in. Right? What is she being used as a symbol of or whatever, right? And then you would tell me, right, that it's in Reflections on the Revolution in France, Edmund Burke, right? So yeah, she is specifically relevant to a particular text, right? Now, if there's more than one text to which the term is relevant, you just have to give me one, right? But yeah, the basic idea here, right, the reason I want you doing that anyway is I want you attaching these ideas to specific things that we read. Any other questions? Okay, I also do just want to say, good job on the response papers, guys. This was probably about the best first set of response papers I have had from a class in a while. So yeah, I was really pretty impressed with this. And as the semester goes on, you're only going to get better, right? So yeah, I mean, you guys really dove into this and did a good job. So these were a joy to read and grade, to the extent that grading is ever a joy. So, the music that I was playing in class for you at the beginning is Ludwig van Beethoven's Third Symphony, the Eroica. Please bear in mind that is Eroica as in heroic, right? Not the erotica as in erotic, right? We are keeping our minds out of the gutter here today. It was composed in 1804, 1805. Now the reason I was playing this particular piece of music is that when Beethoven wrote it, he dedicated it to Napoleon. Now, what do you guys know about Napoleon or about the Napoleonic Wars, if anything?
He pretty much took power after the revolution.
Yeah, he takes power at the tail end of the French Revolution, right? And a lot of historians technically consider Napoleon's reign part of the revolutionary period because the monarchy didn't come back yet. Yeah, he essentially takes the revolutionary government and transforms it into an imperialist dictatorship, right? What else do we know about Napoleon, if anything? Or what's what popular impressions of Napoleon are there?
Didn't he get banished?
He did, yes. After his final defeat in 1815, he is banished from Europe. He was banished twice. I don't remember which island he actually died on. I think St. Helena is the island he is banished to in 1815, on which he passes away after the Battle of Waterloo. But yeah, he ends up being, he's finally defeated and banished from Europe. Yep. And the old status quo in France kind of then starts to reassert itself, right? So Napoleon's defeat and exile marks the end of at least that first revolutionary period in France. Anything else that you guys know or think about Napoleon? Yeah, Jamal.
The Louisiana Purchase.
Yeah, the United States bought about a third of our current landmass from Napoleon's government, right? Yeah. They were desperate to raise funds. War is expensive. And we bought Louisiana and much of the territory around the Mississippi from Napoleon's government. That is true. Anything else? What about Napoleon's appearance?
Short.
Yeah, that's what the common picture of Napoleon suggests, right?
He was average height, wasn't
He was actually of ordinary height, yeah. He was not particularly short. There's a reason why we tend to perceive him as having been a small man, though. And a lot of it has to do with the legacy of British cartoons from the early 19th century. So I'm going to give you an example here of a cartoon by James Gilray. Which represents France and Britain carving up the world between them as though it were a plum pudding. Right, we see that this plum pudding has lines on it like a globe. We see Europe here, America over here, right? So on and so forth. And Napoleon is depicted in cartoons of this period as a tiny man with a giant hat, right? This isn't what he actually looked like. But it was a way that British pop culture portrayed an enemy in a way to make him look ridiculous, right? And this is something that persists. I remember seeing as a kid a British fantasy movie called Time Bandits that had been made by some former members of the Monty Python comedy group. And the British actor Ian Holm, who you might recognize from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies as the guy who plays Bilbo Baggins, plays Napoleon in that movie. And Napoleon in the film is a tiny man who is obsessed with height, right? And he's constantly rattling off these lists of world leaders who are under 5'2". So, right, so this is something that is, played up in British pop culture, even into the late 20th century, for comic effect, right? But yeah, this was simply a way that British cartoonists and humorists tried to minimize Napoleon and the threat they felt that he posed, right? So let's talk a little bit about what's going on in this period. Why an artist like Beethoven might dedicate a symphony to Napoleon, who is not remembered particularly fondly by history, particularly not in countries that he invaded, right? And what was going on in Britain that made all of this such a big deal, right? So first off, we'll start with what was going on in France, right? So the period that we were talking about in the last class, covered about 1789, 1790, right? So the beginnings of the Revolution. Now, by about 1792, things were getting a lot dicier in France. In August, the king is finally deposed, right? So the National Assembly strips him of his titles and privileges. And he is, renamed. He is no longer, King Louis XVI. He is now simply Citizen Louis Capet. Capet being the traditional surname of the French king. It's a French word for head. In September of that same year, we have what's called the September Massacre. Right, egged on by radical politicians and fearing invasion from the king's former allies in places like Prussia, the citizens of Paris start rounding up prisoners. Some are aristocrats who fell on the wrong side of the revolution. Some of them are ordinary citizens, and just start executing people as enemies of the state. So, in 1793, a couple months after the king himself is executed in January, we have the formation of what was called the Committee on Public Safety. And it was the Committee on Public Safety that instituted what comes to be called the Reign of Terror. In fact, this was the name they used for it themselves. Now, what the committee was trying to do was moderate the violent impulses of the masses by confining execution to people who were genuine enemies of, essentially tried as and convicted as genuine enemies of the state. In practice, this largely continued the mass slaughters of the September Massacre. And by 1794, the committee is overthrown and its leaders are executed. And from 1794 to 1799, you have continuing waves of executions of perceived enemies by the reactionary group that overthrew the committee. Not only that, there's also a great deal of graft, overall corruption, and financial malfeasance. Then in 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte is elected first consul, that is, leader of the assembly. And Napoleon comes from a relatively humble middle-class background. He's not a Parisian. He comes from the island of Corsica, which is off the coast of France and was considered kind of a backwater. So he's this guy from the sticks, from a humble background, who manages to maneuver his way up to the top here through talent, energy, and intelligence. And by the time he gets to the top, he completely reorganizes the French state, right? He gets it back on sound financial footing. He fires and replaces all of the corrupt bureaucrats. Basically, he gets the French government working again. And then, within a period of a few years, begins a massive military buildup, an invasion campaign that sweeps across Europe, right? But we can see here why artists of a certain political bent at least initially admired Napoleon, right? Here was a guy who came up from nothing and made something of himself, right? Like a kind of like genuine up by the bootstraps success story. He also instituted a system of meritocracy in French government, right? If you ever heard the phrase "careers open to talent," that's something that's a phrase that originates with Napoleon. He was not interested in the when he was hiring government ministers, things like that. He wasn't interested in your birth or your pedigree or your lineage. He was hiring people based on talent and qualification. So he is a threat to the old social order of Europe, as well as to its political order, right, and to security overall. Now let's look at how Britain fits into this particular pattern. This is a particular historical pattern, right? In terms of security, what advantage does Britain have over other countries in Europe?
It's an island.
Yeah, it's an island. It is, as a result, much harder to invade, right? In fact, I'm going to show you here a couple of maps of Europe in the Napoleonic era. And we wait. So the areas colored in red here are areas that were either under British control or were British allies. The Napoleonic Empire itself is in blue. States that were dependent on, that is, had been conquered by Napoleon, are in light blue, and the states in purple were Napoleon's eventual allies. Right? Some of them had fought him in the beginning, but eventually allied with him. So what do we see when we look at this map? Okay, Italy, yes, all right. I get that. But
It's being surrounded. Britain's being surrounded.
yeah, Britain's almost kind of being squeezed out to the peripheries of Europe, right? We've got Portugal, Sicily, Um, Sardinia.
They're also separated.
Yeah,
Like Britain
yeah.
is separated from the other side of Britain.
Yeah, so Napoleon's military successes are squeezing Britain out, right? And this was the general pattern throughout the Napoleonic War period, right? Napoleon was winning the land war across Europe, but Britain remained the dominant naval power, right? The British Navy was supreme in the waters. Now, if we look also at where major battles took place in the period from about, we're talking, the Napoleonic Wars, the period we're talking about, last from about 1803 to 1815. This is another one of those things where historians kind of differ on the date, exactly when they started, but everybody agrees when it ends, right? It ends in 1815 at the Battle of Waterloo. Whenever I teach this section, I always get that stupid ABBA song stuck in my head. I can't get rid of it. No one knows the song? Well, lucky you. Okay, so what do we notice about the pattern of battles here? Where are none of them fought?
In the ocean.
Okay, we don't see any in the ocean here, right? Although there actually were naval battles. What's that? Yeah. Britain is untouched here, right? There are no battles fought on British soil. That does not, however, mean that Britain feels secure. In fact, some of the conservatism of the period can be explained by the fact that throughout the 18th century, there were a number of internal threats to stability that made the British response particularly defensive, right? So, for example, in 1745, in Scotland, there was a Jacobite rising. Jacobites were people who attached themselves to the idea of restoring the male line descendants of James II to the British throne. Jacobus is the Latin form of James, hence Jacobite. So, the Jacobites wanted to overturn the results of the Glorious Revolution of 1688, right? They were soundly defeated, but you still hear in Scottish pop culture and folk songs today echoes of Jacobite sentiment. And everybody knows what happened in North America between 1776 and 1783, right? Yes, Nick.
I do have one question about the Jacobite Rising.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
if it actually gained traction and they overturned the Glorious Revolution, that would have made the English crown Catholic again, right?
Yes, it would have. In fact, James's grandson, his son and grandson had been living in exile in Rome. And the grandson actually came to Scotland during the Jacobite Rising to lead the armies there. Charles Francis Stewart, he's known in Scottish folklore as Bonnie Prince Charlie. So that would have restored Catholicism as the national religion. Yeah. 1776 to 1783, we have the American Revolution, in which most of Britain's North American colonies break away, though it retains colonies in Canada and the Caribbean. And in 1798, in Ireland, a group inspired by the American and French revolutions and Enlightenment philosophy called the United Irishmen rises up to try to fight for Irish independence. Now, the Jacobite Rising and the United Irishman Rising both fail. But one thing that all three of these risings have in common is some level of French assistance. Right? If your big enemy is the British state, right? Who are you going to go to for help for your rising? You're going to look to their big enemy, right? Who has something to gain through British weakness? The other issue plaguing British society throughout the 18th century is the mental instability of King George III. Right? So on the one hand, we have a stable monarchy in that George III reigns for a long time, but once he hits middle age, he is frequently incapacitated by long periods of mental illness. So for much of his reign, he's not a terribly effective king, right? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how these, can you pull that up over your nose, please? Thank you. How these fears and anxieties manifest themselves first in the British built environment and then in the literature of the period. So this is what's called the Martello Tower. It's called the Martello Tower because the first ones were built in a town called Mortella on the island of Corsica in the 16th century. But the British versions are built throughout the 19th century primarily, right? Starting at the end of the 18th century, going up to the end of the 19th century. And yeah, they're these little kind of squat round towers. You can put a couple cannons in them, but mostly they were useful as coastal watchtowers, right? And you find these all over Britain. You find them in England, you find them in Scotland, you find them in Wales. Several of the best preserved examples are in Ireland, in the Dublin area. You also find them in Canada, in the Caribbean, and Australia, right? Basically any place where the British held territory in the early 19th century, the coastline is surrounded by these little squat towers. Now, the feared Napoleonic invasion never came, but these were a kind of like a buttress against that, right? A kind of early warning system. Now, the wars also made celebrities of certain leading military figures. So this is Admiral Horatio Nelson. Now immortalized as one of the captain's cousins on bottles of a popular inexpensive spiced rum. Nelson was the great naval leader of the period. He won a huge victory at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, during which he was also killed. So he died in action at Trafalgar. And there's a monument to him in London at Trafalgar Square. In fact, there are Nelson's pillars in several different British imperial capitals. There used to be one in Dublin until Irish nationalists blew it up in the 60s. But these pillars, right, They tower above the landscape, and they are meant both to inspire and to intimidate, right? On the one hand, they are a reminder of a great British naval victory. We see here, Nelson is standing here, he's missing a hand, and he is, standing in front of several coils of rope, right, because he's a Navy guy. But they're also reminders of British imperial power and military dominance, right? Particularly in places where the pillars weren't especially welcome, like Ireland. The other thing that these monuments tend to do is elide the messy personal lives of the figures that they commemorate. And also the fact that a lot of the naval battles that Nelson fought in the Caribbean were fought to protect slave plantations from the French. And indeed, there were a number of slaves who served in the British Navy and should have been decorated for bravery and awarded prize monies, most of which were taken by their commanders. So the whole system propping the pillar up is largely disguised by the kind of the cleanness of the pillar and the design, right? Now, the great hero of the land war is Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. And it's Wellington who leads the coalition army that finally runs Napoleon to ground at Waterloo in 1815. Wellesley, like Edmund Burke, is a Protestant Irishman of English descent. So he belongs to a class we'll be talking about in future sessions called the Anglo-Irish. Though Wellington did not like identifying or being identified as Irish. He was born in Dublin, but he was fond of saying that being born in a stable does not make one a horse. And this is the Wellington Monument in Dublin. No representation here of Wellington himself, right? There is a plaque near the bottom which depicts battle. But otherwise, it's another one of these just kind of big towering obelisks, right? It's this great big towering thing that is a projection of British power into the surrounding area, right? This is a more conventional monument to Wellington. It's an equestrian statue at the town of Aldershot in southern England. And the reason why I put this up, or the reason why I mention this, right, is that these monuments go up all over the place, right? There are monuments to Nelson and monuments to Wellington and various Napoleonic War heroes all over Britain, right? It starts this kind of big culture of war commemoration that persists throughout the 19th century into the aftermath of the Second World War. And the heroes depicted are mostly the same people, right? But again, like, this largely elides what the experience of the common soldier was and projects an image of security and national strength when we can tell by reading a lot of the text that we looked at today, right, that in fact people were not feeling nearly so secure as these monuments might indicate. Nor was the experience of the common soldier very similar to that of the Duke of Wellington. So let's start looking at the texts themselves here. How did these go for you guys? What did you think of? What did you guys think of what you read for today?
Some of it was hard to get through.
Okay, what made it hard to get through, Jamal?
Let's see. Like with Discharge Soldier, at first I was kind of confused because I thought I was supposed to be talking about soldier, but then it made sense afterwards.
Yeah.
But like a lot of times it took a while to get to like what it was actually supposed to be about.
Yeah, and I think like this is one thing to get. We're going to be reading some more Wordsworth, I think, next week, right? And one thing to get about Wordsworth, right, is that Wordsworth, even when he's writing ostensibly about someone else, is pretty much always writing about himself. It's the sort of thing that gets frustrating after a while. But yeah, the Discharge Soldier, in the form that you read, was written in the 1790s, but not published. And Wordsworth continues to rework that poem over the course of his life, and it finally appears in a more or less finalized form after his death, in a long autobiographical poem called The Prelude, which some Wordsworth critics regard as his greatest work and his greatest statements, and which other scholars regard as reams and reams of pointless bloviation. As we talk more about Wordsworth, I'll leave you to decide which side I'm on there. Yeah, other impressions you guys have of this before we dig too deeply into it.
Kind of like the sort of metaphors in some of them.
Okay, like what?
I think it was in the Fears of Solitude.
Okay. Right. Written by Wordsworth's great frenemy, Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
I like how he sort of makes this glorious scene and then just tears it apart when he starts talking about fires and storms.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's pause there for a minute. Let's look at the Coleridge poem on page 749. So the context that Coleridge provides in the little epigraph to the poem, they write, written in April 1798 during the alarm of an invasion, right? This is actually really important to consider as you're reading the poem, right? That this is written as a response to a particular situation, right, in which the country is in a state of alarm over the possibility of French invasion, right? Now this is before Napoleon even comes to power, though. Can I get somebody to read, starting with A Green and Silent Spot?
A green and silent spot.
Thank you, Nick.
Amid the hills, a small and silent dwell. Over stiller place, no singing skylark ever poised himself. The hills are healthy, save the dwelling swelling slope, which hath a gray and gorgeous covering on, all golden with the never bloomless firs, which now blooms most profusely, but the dell, bathed with the mist, or bathed by the mist, is fresh and delicate as vernal cornfield, or the unripe flax, when through its half-transparent stalks at eve, the level sunshine glimmers with green light. Oh, 'tis a quiet, spirit-healing nook, which all, methinks, would love, but chiefly he, the humble man, who in his youthful years knew in so much of folly as he made his early manhood more securely wise. Here he might lie on fern or withered heath, while from the singing lark that sings unseen the minstrelsy that solitude loves best. And from the sun, and from the breezy air, sweet influences trembled over his frame, and he, with many feelings, many thoughts, made up a meditative joy, and found religious meanings in the forms of nature. And so his senseless gradually wrapped in a half-sleep, he seemed of better worlds, and dreaming hears thee still, O singing lark, that singest like an angel in the clouds.
Okay, thank you. So let's start here with this first verse paragraph, right? So how many of you are, so what's the kind of scene that's set up here? Like what stands out about the scene that Coleridge sets up here?
Very floral.
Okay, yeah, flowers everywhere, right? Everything's in bloom, everything's green, right? What else?
Like serene.
Pardon?
It's serene, like peaceful.
Yeah, it's tranquil, it's quiet, right? Right, you know, no singing skylark ever paused over stiller scene, right? Anything else that stands out to you about it? Yeah, Aaron, did you have something to say?
Well, I was gonna say, maybe mountains or like in a valley somewhere.
Yeah, it certainly seems like someplace that's supposed to be secure, right? So what Coleridge is doing here is trafficking in a tradition called pastoral. Are any of you familiar with the term pastoral? Or know what it means when we talk about pastoral art or pastoral poetry?
Kind of, I don't know how to explain it.
Okay. So, pastor in Latin means shepherd. And so pastoral poetry is poetry that sets up imaginary, secure rural spaces, often called idylls. IDYLLS. That are protected from the world outside, right? Here in this green glade, you can sit with your sheep and play your open pipe and dance and be merry, right? And nothing will bother you. So pastoral is always artificial. And constructed, right? It's something that educated urban poets tend to write, often to make particular political points. And it's connected, in this case, to the building of what comes to be called a kind of myth of England. Which we'll see really come into its own around World War I. And this myth of England is this idea of England as a green, pleasant, land of liberty and plenty. And that's what Coleridge paints here, at least in the first half of this verse paragraph, right? And then what do we find in the second half of this verse paragraph?
The man who's singing.
Yeah, he puts a person in the scene, right? And what's the person like that he puts into the scene? What qualities does this person have?
Sort of a dreamer.
Yeah.
Very optimistic.
Somebody who can just kind of lie back on the ferns, right? and take in all of these sense impressions and form those sense impressions into dreams, right? So he's imagining a person here of great sensibility. Now, do we remember from last week when we talked about the Gothic, what sensibility meant?
Being able to sense emotions.
Close.
Calm?
It's not calm. Jamal's thinking along the right lines.
What did you say?
He said ability to sense emotions.
Instead, people used to see something emotional.
Yes, thank you, Serenity. Yes, sensibility is susceptibility to sensory and emotional impressions. And for the Romantics in particular, this becomes a kind of key characteristic of the artist, right? That the artist is a person of great sensibility who is able to then form those impressions into new things, right? Into poems, into paintings, into sculptures that are entirely original. So England here, as presented by Coleridge, is an ideal place for these kinds of sensitive imaginings, right? Provides this kind of secure retreat from the troubles of the world at large. And yet, can I get somebody to read, starting from "My God, It Is a Melancholy Thing"?
My God, it is a melancholy thing for such a man who would full fain preserve his soul in calmness, yet
Perforce. Mm-hmm.
must feel for all his human brethren. Oh my God, it weighs upon the heart that he must think what uproar and what strife may now be stirring. This way or that way, over these silent hills, invasion and the thunder and the shout, and all the crash of onset, fear and rage and undertow of conflict, even now perchance, and in his native isle, carnage and groans beneath this blessed sun. We have offended, O my countrymen, we have offended very grievously, and been most tyrannous.
Okay, so what does he imagine happening in this second verse paragraph?
Basically, a storm comes in and ruins all the serenity.
Is it a literal storm?
No.
Yeah, what's really happening here?
Wars and such.
Yeah, invasion, right? This is the invasion feared in the epigraph to the poem, right? And whose fault is the invasion? Who does he blame the invasion on?
Countrymen?
Whose countrymen? Which countrymen?
England?
Yeah. What he's saying here is that we brought this on ourselves, right? There's an invasion coming, and through our lack of sympathy with the revolutionaries in France, through our lack of fellow feeling for the slaves who worked the sugar plantations in the Caribbean, for our high-handed attitude towards the rest of the world, we are being punished, right? That we have enjoyed security in our little glade, but now the chickens are coming home to roost. And we are threatened by problems of our own making. So he sets up this pastoral retreat in this myth of England only to immediately undermine it, right? That this safe space for dreaming is threatened, because we did too much peaceful dreaming and didn't pay enough attention to what was being done beyond our borders, often in our name, right? So, this idea of the invisibility of what's going on in the outside world to the average English person is going to be a big deal in both Clarkson and Coleridge's pieces that you're going to be reading for next time too, right? So sit on that and keep that in mind. Remember that. I would like to point back to Wordsworth, the Discharge Soldier. For a moment, in part because what this gives us also is a sense of the kinds of things that the monument renders invisible, right? So what's the basic situation the poem describes, right? So Jamal noted that at least for the first, half of the poem or so, it mostly just seems to be this guy walking around enjoying the cool night air and the solitude, right? And then who does he run into? Yeah.
He's just sitting in stillness and not moving.
Yeah. The soldier is just sitting at a crossroads, right?
Kind of like how we talked about, he was wandering and then the soldier, he seemed kind of aimless to him.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So this is a guy who has been discharged from the service, right? Does anybody recall where the soldier said he'd been serving? Page 747, around line 94, right? I asked his history. He in reply was neither slow nor eager, but unmoved, and with a quiet, uncomplaining voice, a stately air of mild indifference, he told a simple fact, that he had been a soldier, to the tropic isles had gone, where he had landed now some 10 days past. So he's been in the Caribbean. Right, so he has been sent, away from home to defend British colonial possessions, right? And now he's back, and what's the situation he finds himself in?
He's alone.
Yeah, he's by himself, right?
He's without money.
He has no money. Basically, he gets his discharge papers, right? The ship just drops him off, and he's expected to find his own way home, right? So, we have this, this figure of the man who has been used by elites to protect their possessions, right? And then is dropped off without a penny to his name, told, thanks for your service, go on home, right? So one of the social problems here that Wordsworth is trying to point out is that there are lots of these guys wandering around England, right? These, men whose bodies and health have been used up in the service, who are now just kind of stuck with little to do, right? The state has made no provision for them. So they have to seek charity where they can. And if we look at the physical description of the soldier on page 746, right? While thus I wandered, step by step led on, it chanced a sudden turning of the road presented to my view an uncouth shape, so near that, stepping back into the shade of a thick hawthorn, I could mark him well, myself unseen. He was in stature tall, a foot above man's common measure tall, and lank and upright. There was in his form a meager stiffness. You might almost think that his bones wounded him. His legs were long, so long and shapeless that I looked at them, forgetful of the body they sustained. Right? So the way he's looking at the soldier, it's almost more as a collection of parts, right, than as a coherent single body. His arms were long and lean, his hands were bare, His visage, wasted though it seemed, was large in feature, his cheeks sunken, and his mouth showed ghastly in the moonlight. From behind a milestone propped him, and his figure seemed half sitting and half standing. I could mark that he was clad in military garb, though faded yet entire. His face was turned towards the road, yet not as if he sought for any living thing. He appeared forlorn and desolate, a man cut off from all his kind, and more than half detached from his own nature. So there's there's a contrast here, right, between the speaker's desired solitude, right? He's wandering out alone at night because he likes it. And the solitude of the soldier, right, which is forced, or it's more like alienation. Being kind of like cut off from the sympathy of his fellow beings, right? And this actually plays on a lot of fairly common tropes in British art and pop culture in the period, right? Particularly from those quarters that are a bit more critical of the war effort. So I'm going to show you another cartoon. This is where we're going to leave it. Also by James Gilray. It's called John Bull's Progress. Now, John Bull is a name given to a kind of fictional character who's like kind of like the archetypal Englishman, right? He's usually a little chubby fat guy in a blue coat with a brown hat with mutton chops, and he's often like pointing and exhorting you to do something. But his origins are as a kind of figure for the average, ordinary country English person, right? So this is a sort of like a four-stage argument, right? Up here, we have John Bull happy, right? He's sitting fat with his mug of beer in front of the fire, napping, the dog and the cat napping alongside him. His wife and daughter are happily industrious, and the two small children here playing with a pet bird, right? Then, John Bull goes off to the wars, right? So he's marching off with the other men while his family is tugging at his coattails, trying to get him to stay behind, right? Then, because he's gone off fighting in the wars, his property is in danger. They're going to lose their house, they're going to lose their farm, whatever, right? So the family are pawning everything that they own, right? Farm implements, spinning wheel, butter churn, even livestock, right? One of the kids is leading a pig. And then when John Bull comes home, there's nothing left of him or of the family, right? Or of their property. So the argument here is about the way the wars treat not only the common soldier, but also the families left behind, right? That this is something that's kind of eating away, particularly at rural society. And we will continue to talk about how war and land ownership laws eat away at rural society as we continue delving into Romanticism. But for now, I want you guys thinking about the transatlantic slave trade for next time, right? So these are the guide questions for what we're going to be doing on Wednesday. Let me know if you have any questions about anything, and I will get the cleanup rags ready.